Hello and welcome to this second episode on our GCSE exam prep on The Lord of the Flies. Last week we went through the character of Ralph, and every week we will be going through characters and themes, key quotes, model answers, basically everything that you need to succeed in your upcoming GCSE on The Lord of the Flies. So let's just go straight into looking at our character Jack today. As I said, we did Ralph last week. First thing to notice about Jack is that he is the same as basically all of the characters in The Lord of the Flies, really, on a bit of a fall arc. So what that means is he starts off pretty well. He makes bad decisions and ends up in a bit of a trough. For me, that the most obvious part of that is when Jack tries to overthrow Ralph as chief, and no one puts their hand up for Jack. And he goes off crying and he says, "Oh, I'm not going to play with you anymore." And he gets really upset. Then he hits a peak when he actually does take over the island. Obviously, this is a really bad thing for everyone, but he is then fully in control. And then obviously the final fall for him is the fact that they are rescued. And he then, after this novel is finished, assumedly will have to face the consequences of the choices that they made on this island and live with them forever. So it's a bit of a full arc, Jack. He is a dynamic antagonist, and you could argue possibly an anti-villain. So let me just explain that out to people who don't know. So a dynamic character is a character that changes through their experiences. So Jack does change through his experiences. He actually starts off as quite I wouldn't say a nice little boy, but like he certainly is civilized. He understands boundaries. And he isn't, a dictating monster basically to begin with. But through his experiences, through his frustration, and particularly, I suppose, sped up by the beast, the fact that there is the Lord of the Flies there on the island with them, and painting his face, which is a huge symbolic change in his character when he puts on this mask of paint. He becomes a villain. He becomes more and more villainous, more and more tyrannical. And he's egged on, I suppose, by his sidekick, which would be Roger, is the main sidekick of Jack. So between them, that corruption comes out more and more. And so it is dynamic. He doesn't start off fully evil and continue to be fully evil. Now, you could make an argument he does, that he was always this evil and it just slowly takes time for those layers to be revealed. Those are both good arguments, actually. But he is either way an antagonist. Some people, if you want to be quite sympathetic to Jack, could say that he's an anti-villain. The main reasons that you would say that, and by the way, an anti-villain means it's a character who is a villain, but we see humanism, human qualities within them. We sort of understand why they are the villain, effectively. So you could argue that with Jack. You could argue that the reason he becomes this terrible person, who's even willing at the end to, there's this quote I'll talk more about, sharpen a stick at both ends, which suggests he's going to kill Ralph and stick his head on a stick. That's pretty messed up. It all comes from the fact that he's 12 years old. He doesn't know better than this. He's still learning and developing, and he's had civilization totally taken away from him. So there's a chance that some people might somewhat sympathize with Jack a little bit, just based on how young he is and based on the terrible situation that the boys have all been put in this novel. He represents savagery, clearly. He represents greed. He represents tyranny. He represents corruption. There are lots of other words I could use. But so let's start with savagery. So, right from the beginning of the novel, when characters start falling apart, he's the one that falls apart the most, the quickest. So he's the one that gets his knife out and sort of tries to stab the first pig. He can't at the beginning because he isn't quite there yet. He sort of stabs his knife into a tree trunk. He's like, next time. Yeah. He's the most eager to sort of be more native, so to speak. He wants to be more tribalistic. He's the one that wants to run around and dance and hunt and get painted faces and all that stuff. And all of that is sort of a link to some extent to the savage, right? To the fact that it's more primal, instinctive. It's not civilized. And the other reason that we see this savagery, of course, is that Jack at the beginning says that he will keep the fire going. The fire obviously represents hope. It's like the one chance that the boys have of being saved, basically. Without the fire, the smoke from the fire, any ships or planes that are going nearby the island that they're on won't see them. There's no signal. So that how could anyone possibly know they're there, right? And yet Ralph wants the fire to keep going, but Jack doesn't really care. He doesn't keep the fire going. And a ship does go by in one of the middle chapters. And because Jack hasn't kept the fire going, and he's off hunting, they don't get rescued in that moment. So you could say as well that the savagery, in some sense, is more a lack of preparing for being rescued. Jack doesn't even seem to want to be rescued really that much. He represents greed because obviously right from the beginning, he wants to be chief, he wants to be in control, he wants all the power. And of course, tyranny, this gets worse. So think about nearer towards the end when obviously he shows no remorse for the fact that Piggy is killed. He drags off Sam and Eric and forces them to be part of the tribe. He says that they're going to search the entire island, like scour and scrub it to find Ralph and to kill him. So he's more and more of a tyrannical character. And he also allows Roger to do terrible things. So we don't know what Roger does to Sam and Eric, but we know it's bad. We know it's really bad. Possibly sort of torture, beating them up, that sort of thing, really bad. So he represents tyranny. Now, all of this stuff that I'm talking to you about here, if the question comes up about how the character is presented, which is a paragraph that we'll be creating in a minute, these are the kinds of points that you could lead with. So Jack is presented as a dynamic antagonist. He's presented as a representation of savagery or a representation of greed or a representation of tyranny. He also rises to power through his fear, his generation of fear and his charisma. So he is a charismatic boy. He does, he does give the boys what they want. He just does lots of dancing and hunting and all the fun stuff. Whereas Ralph, obviously, trying to actually keep the civilization going, and Piggy, they have to do the more boring stuff, building the huts, talking about where they should poop and not poop, and, trying to actually keep civilization going. Jack doesn't care about any of that. He's just like, yeah, let's go dancing and hunting and have fun. So he is charismatic. He also leads through fear because he starts off the same as everyone else, not thinking that the beast, or same as all the other big uns, all the bigger boys, thinking that the beast is not real. But then he becomes convinced the beast is real, and he actually uses the beast as an excuse for some of the things that are done. So when they stab Simon, he says, oh, it was the beast. The beast took, the form of Simon and killed him. And, he doesn't allow the beast to die, even though they stab Simon to death. The beast is still alive in his head. So he uses the beast as a fear tactic. And, this play was written, this novel was written shortly after, World War II, relatively recently to it. And William Golding was fighting in that war. So there could be some parallels here to Hitler or other tyrannical dictators. The fact that, Jack is a terrible leader, and yet he does lead through fear. And that does sound a lot like Hitler to me, and fascism. Could also be linking to communism. There was the rise of communism coming, Stalinism, and so on around that same time. So it could be linking to just generally those tyrannical leaders and what was happening in the world. So make sure you check that out. We'll probably talk more about that in upcoming sessions too. He's very superstitious and paranoid, especially towards the end. When they kill the first, I think it's the first pig, he literally cuts the head of the pig off and sticks it on a stick, puts it on a stick that's sharpened at both ends. And he says that this is an offering to the beast. So there's a lot of superstition there. It's like a blood offering to this beast that he thinks is there to try and keep the beast away and to keep the beast happy. He does provide genuine value for the boys. That's something that you have to understand as well. He's a bad character, and the value he provides is more like sugar. It's short term and it's probably not good in the long run, but he does feed the boys. He does provide them with strength, which they feel they need. And he fills in a gap which has been left, a void that's been left because they don't have any strong fatherly, motherly figures anymore, right? So he does provide that genuine value to the boys. And that strength of Jack's character is one of the reasons why most of the boys choose to follow him. It's only a few of the big uns, a few of the more advanced thinkers of the boys, relatively, they're still only like young teenage boys that realize that Jack's way is not going to be the way to get saved. and more of the people that are on that side die anyway. Obviously, Simon is stabbed to death. Piggy is crushed under a rock. The conch is also crushed. We'll talk about that later too. And clearly Jack becomes more immoral and more immoral. So there you go. There's a bit quick overview of Jack. There's some points that you could raise if the question comes up on Jack and how he's presented. And we'll do a model answer in a minute, or a paragraph of how Jack is presented. So let's go through some quotes for Jack, some of the key ones that would be good for you to remember and to keep in your revision list. So, I ought to be chief, said Jack, with simple arrogance, because I'm chapter chorister and head boy. I can sing C sharp. So just think about this naivety of this quote at the beginning. The fact that he thinks that because he can sing the best and he's the head boy and stuff means that he should be chief. It shows his naivety, and it also shows to extent his arrogance, and obviously the fact that he wants the power. But he doesn't seem to understand what it takes to be a good leader. He just puts forward what he can do as if that is what a leader takes. And then that's exactly what he does in the rest of the novel too. He doesn't think about what a good leader is. He just says, well, I am a good leader, therefore what I do is what a good leader would do. He doesn't think about it beyond that. Maybe he thinks about it just in the sense of, obviously all the boys want meat, and so the fact that he goes hunting and gets the meat for them obviously helps his cause. One of the big moments between Jack and Ralph and Piggy is when Jack has successfully hunted, roasted up pig meat, pork, and is feeding all the boys. And even Ralph and Piggy eat the meat. And that is really symbolically showing how desperate the boys are for someone like Jack. Not necessarily to be full chief, but to step up and to provide them with more than just the fruit that they've been eating and nothing else, right? So that is really important as well. There's more arrogance to Jack as well. He says, at the beginning, remember, Ralph and Jack are buddies. So this is from early on in the novel. I agree with Ralph. We have to have rules and obey them. After all, we're not savages, we're English. The English are the best at everything. So there's the arrogance of the idea that the English are best at everything, right? Arrogant tone. What's also interesting, though, is the fact that at this early stage, he wants to create rules. Now, he doesn't want to follow the rules, though, and that's where it links to the next point. Bollocks to the rules. We're strong, we hunt. If there's a beast, we'll hunt it down. We'll close in and beat and beat and beat. So do you see that change in his character? At the beginning, he's like, yeah, let's have rules, lots of rules, because he thinks that by having lots of rules, he'll be able to control people more, right? But then when the rules are actually going against him, it's like, no, bollocks to the rules. You've got all these exclamatory phrases here, all the exclamation marks, and you start to see the savagery in him here more and more, because he's like he's solving his problems with violence. Like, if there's a beast, we'll hunt him down and we'll beat him and beat him and beat him. That's also repetition, the repetition of this. I've already mentioned about the food, but I'll just quickly, again, we've got these short exclamatories. It shows his like power, basically, and his forceful tone to the other boys, because he understands, this is symbolic as well. He understands that if he's the one to feed them, then he's ultimately the one to lead them. If he feeds them, he leads them. Think of it that way. So he knows that if he can keep providing meat for the boys, then that will keep them in line. That will keep them following him instead of Ralph. Even though what Ralph offers is more long-term important, what he offers is more short-term important. And it's really important to see how important it is to him to feed everyone. He needs that like power trip of being the provider. He needs them all to eat. He even feeds Piggy. He hates Piggy, but he even feeds Piggy because he needs that status of being the king, being the leader. So he is also, I suppose I should have added this to here. He's also, where do we put this in? I guess we put it in here. He's incredibly prideful and arrogant as well. Very, very prideful and arrogant. Okay. I'm not going to play anymore, not with you. I'm not going to be part of Ralph's lot. This is amazing to me. So this is sort of end of the middle of the novel. And he's still talking. So it's sort of figurative language. I wouldn't quite call it a metaphor exactly, because he really believes this, but he still believes this is a game. this is where you can maybe empathize with him a little bit, because he thinks that this is a game. He thinks that, you know, they're all just playing games with each other and that this is all fun. And if he really thinks that, then, you know, that does sort of not justify what he does exactly, but it makes you think maybe this isn't all just him being evil. It's just he's so young and he doesn't know what he's doing. But the fact he says, I'm not going to play with you anymore, it's like, this isn't a game, Jack. This is like life and death, and we're in trouble. Sharpen a stick at both ends. This one here is the connotations of this. So, you know, sticking a head on a stick, putting a head on a stick. Yeah, sticking on a stick isn't well phrased, but whatever. So he does this with the first pig. He sharpened the stick at both ends. He sticks one of the sharp ends in the ground, and then he sticks the head on the top. And then at the end of the novel, as they're searching for Ralph, Sam and Eric have said to Ralph that Jack ordered to have a stick sharpened at both ends. So again, we get this sense that if Jack finds Ralph, he's going to kill Ralph. He's going to cut off Ralph's head and he's going to stick it on a stick as an offering to the beast. How messed up is that? And we also see, these are in the wrong order, really. We also see his lack of remorse, because when Piggy dies, so when Simon dies, Jack is a little bit like, oh, you know, and he tries to make excuses of, oh, it was the beast, it was the beast. But when Piggy dies, he doesn't make any excuses. He just says, that's what you'll get. I meant that. Exclamatory phrases again, yeah. And it shows that his total savagery again. He doesn't care about the fact that he is now openly murdering some of the members of the boys. He doesn't show any remorse for Piggy. He doesn't care that Piggy's just died. There's no morality here anymore. He is fully evil at this point, towards the end of the novel. And his respect, though, for the beast stays throughout. So he says, no, how could we kill it? So you've got the hyphenation, which shows hesitation and respect potentially for the beast. And this is after Simon's died. So, you know, they've killed Simon. They've seen that Simon died and went into the sea. But in their head, because it's all made up, it's superstition and supernatural, he thinks, well, you know, we killed one version of it, but now it's sort of floated off to another version. We can't kill the beast. So Jack might really believe this, or it might be more that Jack just says this as a continuation of being able to use those fear tactics to keep the boys in line. So that is pretty much an overview of Jack. We've got a little bit of time left, but not much as usual. So I will go for a paragraph on Jack now to finish out. Like always, we're just going to think about how Jack is presented, or how a character is presented. I wanted to keep it that broad because I think that that's the most helpful to you, because we don't know exactly what the question will be, but if it's on Jack, it will be something to do with presentation. So remember that you want to do point, evidence, technique, explanation. And for most of you sitting these exams, you want some reader response, possibly even personal response. Some of you, it's personal response, how you responded as a reader, and then context. And we'll delete out the Ralph one, and we'll put a Jack one. So the Jack one, I think we're going to do the fact that he represents tyranny. Let's do that Jack represents tyranny. I think that's a good, I try and do one that's a little bit less usual, just because then this is something you can use in your exams, hopefully, and it'll help you out a bit. So so the question is, as I said, how is Jack presented, basically? So one of the ways in which Jack is presented by Golding is through his dictatorial power and tyranny. You see this in the quote, bollocks to the rules, which, the exclamatory sentence in the exclamatory sentence shows that Jack has an intimidating and aggressive tone to his voice in this moment, defying the rules which ironically he helped to set up. with Jack in the first place. Since Jack is willing to create rules for the boys, but not to follow them, we get a sense of his growing tyranny, since he has no problem controlling others, does not want to be controlled himself. This is further shown later when Jack has power, more power, in the phrase "seize them." This phrase has symbolism of a ruler. You know, you can imagine a ruler saying, "seize them." It's kind of like something a king or prince or queen or something might say. And since he is now physically holding boys to be in his tribe, he is a full tyrant. So there's a couple of paragraphs for you. Now, just remember that for Lord of the Flies, most of your exam boards do not require extract. That's a good thing and a bad thing, because you have to remember all of the quotes, but you also get the freedom to go from anywhere. As the reader, so we've done our point, we've done our evidence, we've done our technique, we've done explanation. As a reader, we feel we'll feel basically anger and confusion towards Jack, who seems to be dooming the boys to being stuck on the island forever. This is significant because in the society of the 1950s, when this novel was written, people would have been very conscious of fascism and dictators having just fought Hitler in World War II. Something like that. So there's a model answer for you on a paragraph about Jack as a tyrant. You want to always follow that kind of structure that I've given you: point, evidence, technique, explanation, reader response, and context, unless your exam board says something different. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any comments, please comment below. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see any other content on Lord of the Flies or anything else, just feel free to comment that too. And yeah, I will catch up with you next week for another recording.